In this session, we're going to look at PowerPoint as a teaching tool. PowerPoint is probably the most widely used and also most widely misused technology out there when it comes to the teaching and learning process. There's a great expression called death by PowerPoint, and obviously, as the expression would imply, PowerPoint often kills the teaching and learning process because it kills the dynamics of it. So what we're going to take a look at in this session are things to do and not to do so that you don't torture your students and give them death by PowerPoint. We'll start the session by comparing and contrasting the use of PowerPoint and the whiteboard in the language classroom. Next, we'll discuss layout and design for your PowerPoint slides. So, what should you think about when you're designing your slides? Then we'll take a look at the actual content that should go onto a PowerPoint slide. And finally, we'll discuss tips for creating a successful PowerPoint presentation. Remember, this discussion on PowerPoint is all within the context of using PowerPoint for language teaching purposes. Before we jump in and look at PowerPoint as a language teaching tool, let's do a quick compare-contrast between PowerPoint on the one hand and its non-technical counterpart, the whiteboard, on the other. Both PowerPoint and the whiteboard are used to get visual support up there for students to see to support what you're saying verbally as a teacher. So they are both the same, they both have the same intent. Their intent is to back up with print text that students look at visually what you're saying verbally in the classroom. However, they have a couple of key differences. So the whiteboard on the one hand is really a really good tool because it allows you to take what you get from students and put it up on the board. So you can really use it for eliciting. So students really shape what gets put up on the whiteboard for visual support. However, there is a downside to this in that it takes time to put things on the whiteboard. Whether it's the teacher putting information on the whiteboard or the students, it takes time to write out things on the whiteboard. There's another downside. If your writing or printing is not very good or very clear, it can be difficult for students to read what you put up there. So you have to make sure you've got good handwriting or printing skills when you use the whiteboard. And often when we use the whiteboard, we end up turning our backs to the class, which is another downside. So the upside is it does allow for a lot of interaction and participation. The downside is that it is time consuming and the writing is not always as clear as we might want it to be. So the PowerPoint on the other hand gives us the upside. So the upside of PowerPoint is it can be very clear, obviously because it's a printed font. As long as we choose the right font size, PowerPoint is very easy to read, so there's no issue with students being able to read it. There's no issue with having to turn our backs to the class as we write, because obviously it's just right there on the PowerPoint. And there's no issue with time, so it doesn't take time to click on the PowerPoint and the PowerPoint slide comes up. So we don't use up the time in the class that we do with a whiteboard when we're writing on the board. So that's the upside of PowerPoint. The downside of PowerPoint is, unless we're very, very careful, we lose that interactivity, okay? Because we can't take student responses and put them into the PowerPoint unless we get out of the PowerPoint slideshow version and into the input version. So unless we're very, very careful, we lose that interactivity and we can't take student elicited answers and put them into our PowerPoint. So we have to make sure that we get student interactivity and participation in other ways when we're using our PowerPoint. So that's a quick compare-contrast between the two, between PowerPoint as our technical option and the whiteboard as our non-technical option. So the first thing to do when it comes to PowerPoint is keep it simple. Just because you can do something with PowerPoint doesn't mean you should do something with PowerPoint. So all of the do's that I'm going to talk about from here on in, they're all about keeping it simple. So this means don't get your PowerPoint cluttered, keep your font sizes simple, keep your slide progressions simple, keep everything simple when it comes to using your PowerPoint. And here's the reason. You don't want your PowerPoint to overshadow your teaching. Your PowerPoint is not the focus of the teaching. What you're teaching is the focus of your teaching. So PowerPoint should not overshadow what you're trying to do as a teacher in the classroom. So keep it simple. The first thing we're going to talk about when it comes to keeping it simple is the font that you use in your PowerPoint slides. There are many different choices in terms of sizes, styles, and colors, and keep it simple. You're going to get very tired of me saying that. So when it comes to font style, what you want to go for is readability. So you want to go for the simple font styles that are very easy to read. So these are styles that are upright as opposed to in an italics format, and they're styles that don't have a lot of hooks and swirls and things like that at the ends of the different letters. So for your font styles, you want to go for things like Arial, any sans serif font style. Tahoma is good. What else is good? Calibri is good as well. So keep your font styles very simple because you're going for readability, not fanciness or anything like that. Here's an example of a slide with a font style that is not readable. It's a very beautiful font style, but it is very, very challenging to read, and it will be even more challenging for students whose first language is not English. And here's the contrasting slide. We've got a font style that is very readable. It's not fancy. There's no hooks or squiggles or anything like that, and it is very readable. When it comes to font size, once again, you're going for readability. A lot of teachers tend to try and cram a lot of font or text onto one slide because they feel they need all of that text all at once, maybe because it's all related. But what you want to do is make sure that your font size is large enough to be readable from the back of your classroom. Obviously, this font size will vary depending upon the size of your classroom. So one of the things you want to do with your PowerPoint slides is select your font size, project it at the front of your room, and then go to the back of the room and make sure you can actually read it from all the way at the back. So your font size is not dictated by how much text or how many sentences you need to get onto your slide. Your font size is dictated by what is readable from the back of your classroom. Here's an example of a slide with font size that's simply too small. Even students sitting in the front row of a classroom would have difficulty reading this text. Here's the contrasting slide. We've got a font size that is much, much more readable. And readability also comes into play when it comes to your font color. PowerPoint provides us with all sorts of wonderful, beautiful, fancy color schemes when it comes to our PowerPoint slides. But you want to factor in readability. It's another term you're going to get tired of me saying throughout this session. Readability when it comes to color means you want your font colors to be dark. So black is absolutely the best, and then dark blue is another good one, or dark brown, or dark anything. So go with your dark font colors. Don't go with anything that's light. Make sure you've got a good contrast as well between your background and your font colors. So for readability, quite honestly, black is your best font color to go with. Here's an example of a slide that doesn't have a lot of contrast between the font color and the background. So we need a different font color here if we want to keep the background. So we need our font to jump out of the slide rather than blend in with the slide. Here's the contrasting good slide. We've got a font color that jumps out of our background color, so it's much, much easier to read. There are some font colors to avoid. The two most common font colors to avoid are red and green. And this is simply because you want to be courteous to people in your class who might be colorblind, because most colorblind people can't distinguish between the red and the green. So avoid any red-green combinations with your font colors, and also avoid any colors that are really closely related. So if you want to distinguish two words side by side with their font color, make sure there's enough of a contrast between the two fonts so that that distinction comes through very clearly. There is a to-do thing when it comes to font color. And one of the things you want to do is use the selection of colors that are available in PowerPoint to highlight different parts of a text in order to make a teaching point, for example. So one of the things that PowerPoint is really good for is sentence analysis, because what you can do is use different font colors to highlight the different parts of the sentence as you're analyzing it. So you can use one color for your verb, one color for your noun or your subject, one for your object, and so on. So really use that range of colors available in PowerPoint to highlight the analysis that you're doing. This is a really smart way to use PowerPoint as a teaching tool. Just keep in mind, make sure you've got those contrasts in color happening, and make sure you stay away from the red-green combination. This slide is an example of how to strategically use color in your font in order to highlight certain words that you want students to focus on. So this is one of the strengths of PowerPoint. You can use color to really focus attention on specific words. You also want to think about your background color. While white may seem very boring as a background color for your PowerPoint slides, it is actually the most readable. So if you take a dark text or a dark font and put it onto a white background, that is the most readable. And readability is your key here when it comes to your style decisions. There are a lot of fancy combinations of backgrounds and text that you can use, as I've mentioned, but these unfortunately are not readable. So you may think it's boring, but dark text on a white background is your most readable color selection. Here's an example, somewhat exaggerated to make the point, but here's an example of a slide that just has way too much going on in the background. So it's got all sorts of graphics and lines and colors and all sorts of fun stuff happening in the background, and you can't see the text at all. In contrast, here's a slide with a very clean and simple background, and you'll notice just how easy it is to focus on the text and see the text. The next thing to think about is what you actually put on your slides aside from text. A lot of teachers want to put beautiful pictures and cute little icons and things like this on their text, or fancy borders. All of this looks very pretty, but it serves, first of all, no teaching purpose, and second of all, it once again affects the readability of your slides. The simpler your slides are, the more readable they are. So by all means, have maybe some simple border or something like that, but avoid cluttering up your slides with unnecessary pictures, photographs, graphics, and things like that. Keep it simple once again. There are times when you do want to use graphics and photographs and so on with your PowerPoint. And these are times when the graphic or visual material serves a teaching purpose. So for example, if you're teaching vocabulary words, by all means have a picture of each vocabulary word that you're teaching. Have a visual illustration of it. Another way to use visuals is to use flashcards. So rather than holding up paper copies or laminated copies of flashcards, put the visuals from the flashcards up on the PowerPoint. You can also use visuals for prompts. So if you want students to describe a picture, for example, rather than giving each pair of students a picture copy themselves, just put the picture up on the PowerPoint. And the picture is much more easily seen when it's up at the front of the class in a very large version than if it's just in a smaller copy that students are holding. So these are examples of times when you do actually want to put visual material in there, when it serves a teaching purpose. This example PowerPoint slide highlights a good use of graphics. So we've got a cup of steaming coffee to put in the students' minds the idea of aroma, so they can have this visual tool to associate with the word aroma to help them remember the meaning. So this is a good use of graphics. Animation is one of the really fun things that we can do with PowerPoint. So by animation, I mean bringing your text in a different order, one item at a time, having the text come in from different directions, having things move in your visuals that you're putting up there. So there's a lot of fun animation that we can do with PowerPoint. But once again, make sure it serves a teaching purpose. Don't have animation just because you can have animation, because, oh, it's cute or it's interesting. Have animation because it serves a teaching purpose. So the main reason that animation would serve a teaching purpose is if you want to bring your text or your diagramming in a certain order. So if you want to bring part 1 in and then talk about it, and then bring part 2 in and talk about it, and part 3, and so on. In this situation, it makes sense to use animation. It also makes sense to use animation if you want to start to elicit things from the class. So bring a hint up on your PowerPoint and then elicit what students know, and then confirm what they know by bringing the next piece up on your PowerPoint. So these are 2 reasons to use animation for teaching purposes. Don't use animation just because it's there and just because it's fun to do. Another thing to think about when it comes to deciding what to put on your PowerPoint is how much text you're going to put per slide. Remember I mentioned when I was talking about font size that you want to make sure that your font is readable. So this means you also have to make judgment calls about how much text you put on each slide. And the general rule of thumb is to keep it to no more than 4 lines of text per slide. This really limits how much you can put on a slide, but there is a reason for this. If you get very, very dense text on your slide, it once again decreases the readability, and students actually don't read all of that text that you've put up there. So keep your text to 4 lines or less, and also keep your text to key points. This is how you're going to limit the amount of text that you put on your slides. So avoid very text-dense slides. Here's an example of a slide that has too many lines on it. So you'll notice that the text is not that readable, and it would be even less readable if you were standing at the back of a room. In contrast, here's a slide that has only 4 lines of text on it plus the title. You'll notice how much more readable this particular slide is, and also how much easier it is to focus on the text and the main points on the slide. The next thing to think about when it comes to PowerPoint is what you're actually going to put on there in terms of content. So the one thing to keep in mind is never, never, never put every single word that you're going to say on your PowerPoint, and never, never, never stand there and read it in front of your class, because chances are most of your students can already read. So what you want to think about is, what do you want to put up there on your PowerPoint to visually support the teaching that you're doing? And that's what goes on your PowerPoint. So what you want to do is narrow it down to key points. Rather than putting everything that you're going to say, put the key points that you're going to say in order to highlight them and visually reinforce them for your students. So here are some things that you might put on your PowerPoint in terms of content. If you have a vocabulary lesson, you might put up there, first of all, the picture of the vocabulary, but also a brief point form definition of the vocabulary. So that's reinforcing the meaning visually for your students. If you're teaching a grammar lesson, what you might want to put up there are your key points of the grammar rules and illustrate them using animation and diagramming and color coding. So get the key points of the grammar structure up on the PowerPoint. You can do the same thing with pronunciation. Get the key points for pronunciation up on the PowerPoint. For example, indicate sentence stress or word stress or intonation using visual material put on your PowerPoint. Another thing that you might want to put in your PowerPoint or on your PowerPoint, either preposition works, is to put answers. So if you are taking up questions that students have done, so for example, they've just completed a handout or a written exercise, you can put the answers up on the PowerPoint so that students get a visual reinforcement of the answers that are verbally given as you take the answers up as a class. Getting the answers up on PowerPoint is actually more efficient in terms of time than having students come up to the board and write them. So getting your answers on your PowerPoint is a good teaching strategy. There's a final set of content that you can put into your PowerPoint, and this is where the power of PowerPoint, that's a bit of a tongue twister, really becomes evident. You can embed your audio or embed your visual or video into your PowerPoint so that you only have to do one click in order to bring up the audio rather than having to close out one program and bring up another program, for example. You can also embed links to the internet directly in your PowerPoint, so you click on the link and then up it comes, you shut it down, and you're back in your PowerPoint. So have some fun and explore the power of PowerPoint when it comes to embedding audio, embedding video, and embedding internet links. And just a couple of tips when we're looking at the visual material that we're going to put into our PowerPoint. First of all, we have to make sure that the visual material, be it diagrams, photographs, graphics, pictures, anything like that, we have to make sure that it is age appropriate. So, obviously don't have an adult picture, use it with a group of kids and vice versa. And so make sure it's age appropriate. Also make sure that your visual material for your PowerPoint is culturally appropriate. Okay, so don't have culturally inappropriate visual material in your PowerPoint. And then the final thing is just to make sure that the quality of the visual material that you use is good. A lot of times when we pull photographs or graphics off of the internet, they don't have a very high resolution. And then when they get projected on a larger screen, the resolution is gone altogether. So you do want to test out the resolution of the photographs in particular and the graphics that you use in your PowerPoint to make sure you've got the clarity that you need. And if you don't have the clarity, obviously get another picture that does have a high resolution in it. So those are just a few tips to keep in mind when you're putting visual material into your PowerPoint. Here are a few more tips to keep in mind when you're using PowerPoint for your English language teaching. The first tip is to make sure you do a dry run of your PowerPoint presentation before the class. So arrive a few minutes early or test it the night before or the day before. When you're doing the dry run, first of all, make sure that your text is visible from the back of the classroom. Second of all, make sure that all of your internet connections and your links work. So if you've got audio embedded, if you've got video embedded, or if you've got an internet link in your PowerPoint, test them all out and make sure they work before the class. And the third tip is to always have a non-technical backup. Sometimes your technology fails. Your computer crashes, or for some reason the PowerPoint doesn't work, or your internet connection goes down. So for all the technology you use, make sure you have a non-technology backup. So have printed handouts of the PowerPoints in case you need them. Make sure you have other audio sources if your audio is embedded in your PowerPoint, and make sure you have other video sources if your video is embedded in your PowerPoint. And the final tip to keep in mind is don't go too quickly with your PowerPoint. PowerPoint can make your teaching really, really efficient. However, you don't want it to be too efficient so that you rush through everything that you're trying to accomplish. So don't stand there and click, 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 and whip through your PowerPoint. Really take the time and make sure that your use of PowerPoint is interactive. Make sure you get the student participation happening, and make sure you don't go too quickly. In this session, I'm not going to walk you through how to do things in PowerPoint. So I'm not going to say click here to do this or click here to do that. There are enough instructional videos out there on how to do things in PowerPoint. I don't need to duplicate them. What we've done on your handout is given you key links for really good videos that instruct you on the different techniques or different mechanics of PowerPoint. So take a look at some of those videos in order to learn the different functions of PowerPoint that you don't already know. So what we've looked at in this session very quickly are some key things to think about when it comes to creating PowerPoint for instructional purposes. Please remember these different points and don't give your students death by PowerPoint. Don't kill your dynamic teaching and learning process by not using PowerPoint effectively. By all means, use it, but use it well.